Hi, everybody. The last thing we learned in class was we looked at two stories, one of them by Rav Huna and the other one by Rabbah, who both implied from the story that the halacha is like Shemuel, that you have to say Kiddush in the place that you eat. Abaye was one of the students of Rabbah, and he was relating this, and therefore it seems that Abaye also holds like his Rabbah, that you have to say Kiddush in the place that you eat, which is like Shmuel. It is on this that the Gemara asks an objection. Aini, is that true that Abaye actually holds like Shmuel, and his rabbi also holds like Shmuel? The Ha'amar Abaye once said, Kol mili demar havi avid kerav. Every halacha like that my rabbi did, he did it like Rav. He did it like Rav, not like Shmuel. Lebar mehani tlat, except for three things, de avid ki Shmuel, which he did like Shmuel. There are only three halachas that Rav and Shmuel argued on, that my rabbi, which was Rabbah, held like Shmuel. Everything else he held like Rav. What were those three halachas? Matirin mi beged lebeged, that you're allowed to transfer one set of tzitzit to another garment. Madlikin miner lener, you can light one Chanukah candle to another Chanukah candle. And halacha ke Rabbi Shimon bigreira, that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon by dragging. We're going to get to this in a moment. All these three cases, transferring tzitzit, lighting one Chanukah to another, and the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon with regards to dragging, there my rabbi holds like Shmuel. But all the other cases is like Rav. The question is obvious. How can we say that Rabbah, who's Abaye's Rabbah, holds like Shmuel in this case, when it's not one of these three that are listed here? According to Abaye, his rabbi always held like Rav, except for these three cases. Kiddush b'makom seudah, saying Kiddush in the place that you eat, is not one of these three cases. These are the only three cases that Abaye's rabbi, his name was Rabbah, held like Shmuel. In no other place does he hold like Shmuel. So how come we're saying this story that Abaye's Rabbah, holds like Shmuel when it's not one of these three cases? Again, the three cases are transferring one set of tzitzit to another garment, that's allowed. Lighting one Chanukah candle to another, that's also allowed. And the third one is the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon by greira, which means dragging. I want to expand a little bit on this topic. There is an idea on Shabbat, a concept called davar she'eno mitkaven. It's written right over here. This concept means you do something on Shabbat that is permitted, which results in something that is not allowed. And the example is dragging. Dragging a bench. If I'm dragging a bench that's really heavy, I'm dragging on the floor, I'm allowed to drag the bench. But the problem is when I'm dragging the bench on the ground, it ends up making a ditch in the ground, and that is not allowed. So I'm doing something that's permitted, but as a result, something is happening that's not allowed. That's called davar she'eno mitkaven. And there's a machloket on whether or not you're allowed to drag the bench, because you are doing something that is not allowed. Rabbi Shimon holds that davar she'eno mitkaven is allowed on Shabbat, and Shmuel also holds that it's allowed. He follows like Rabbi Shimon, and therefore Rabbah, Abaye's rabbi, holds like Shmuel in this case. That's the third case. But nevertheless, the question is very clear. Again, let me repeat the question. The question is, it seems that Abaye and Rabbah only hold like Shmuel in these three cases: transferring tzitzit, transferring the Chanukah candle, and the law of davar she'eno mitkaven, dragging a bench. Not listed in any of these three cases is the case of our case, which is Kiddush b'makom seudah. It seems that based on what Abaye said over here, his rabbi should go like Rav. That's what he said. Kol mili demar, all halachic questions of my rabbi, hava avid kerav, he goes like Rav, except for these three. So how come we are implying and we're learning that Abaye's rabbi holds like Shmuel when it's not one of these three. I'm going to pause the video now to give you a chance to write these notes. I've scrolled up a little bit to allow you to write these notes as well. You can pause the video so you can write this paragraph here. The Gemara actually brings a braita that proves that Rabbi Shimon says you're allowed to drag a bench. Here's the braita. The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Gorer Adam Mita Kiseh Vesafsal Beshabbat. A person is allowed to drag a bed or a chair or a bench on Shabbat. Ubilvad shelo yitkaven la'asot charitz. As long as you don't have the actual intent to make a charitz, to make a ditch in the ground. If you don't have the intent, if it's davar she'eno mitkaven, then okay, I'm allowed to move it. But to actually pull the bench because you want that ditch in the ground, you want to make that little line in the ground, then you're not allowed to do it. So that's what Rabbi Shimon says. I'm going to write down these notes. Okay, here are the notes that I wrote. And again, I'll say it over now and then you can pause. We have assumed that Abaye and Rabbah hold like Shmuel based on the above story, where again, Rabbah told Abaye and the rest of his students that you have to go eat now during Kiddush so that you can go home just in case the lights are out. So therefore we see that you have to Kiddush b'makom seuda. And the Gemara objects to this. Abaye once said that his Rabbah always holds like Rav, except for the above mentioned cases, those three cases that we said above, the tzitzit, the Chanukah candles, and the dragging the bench. Kiddush b'makom seuda is not one of those three cases. If so, how can it be that Abaye and Rabbah hold like Shmuel, the one has to say Kiddush in the place that he eats, when that's not one of the three cases that Shmuel holds like? So how can this be? So the Gemara answers, Kechumra derav have avid, kekule derav lo have avid. Gemara answers that when Abaye said that his rabbi always holds like Rav, it's when Rav was the more strict of the two. When Rav was more strict, that's when he held like Rav, except for those three cases. But when Shmuel was more strict, like in this case, Kiddush b'makom seuda, then he held like Shmuel. So kechumre de Rav have avid. Whenever Rav was strict, he would hold like Rav, except for those three cases. Kekule de Rav lo have avid. When Rav was lenient, like in our case, he didn't hold like Rav, and he held like Shmuel, and that solves the objection. I'll write it down. I'll pause and I'll write it down. Like I said, the Gemara answers. Abaye and Rabbah held like Rav only when he was the stricter opinion, except for those three cases where he held like Shmuel. However, when Rav was the more lenient opinion, he held like Shmuel. In our case, Rav is more lenient. So he holds like Shmuel, that you have to say Kiddush in the place that you eat. And that solves the objection. Again, one more time. We had an objection. The Gemara said, how can Abaye and Rabbah hold like Shmuel when it's not one of those three cases? Abaye himself said that his rabbi always holds like Rav, except for those three cases. Kiddush b'makom seuda is not one of those three cases. The Gemara is answering, when he said that statement, is only when Rav was the stricter opinion. Yes, we always hold like Rav when Rav's the stricter opinion, except for those three cases. But in this case of Kiddush b'makom seuda, Rav is the more lenient opinion, and therefore he holds like Shmuel. You have to say Kiddush in the place that you eat.